Do we believe that Jesus cares? Do we believe that He cares? That He works in ways that go beyond our understanding. He works in ways that we may not be aware. Reminds me of a story. In fact, I was telling this story to some folks this past week. And I know you've all heard it, but it's that story. You guys know that story about the flooding that was taking place, and this guy, his house is being flooded, and through the storm, and it's a horrible storm, horrible flood, and he keeps going to higher ground. To eventually, he's out on his roof, and the flood water is still rising, and he's just praying, "Oh God, save me, save me!" And he just has this blessed assurance that God is going to save him. God's going to save him. He's going to come through. And it wasn't too long after that there was somebody in a boat going through and helping people, whoever needed help. And they say, "Come on, brother, come on. We're here to..." No, that's all right. Go help other people. I've got God on my side. God's going to save me. He's going to deliver me. And they didn't know what to do about that, and so they just went on. And then a little while longer, a helicopter comes through, and "Hey, grab the rope, No, go help somebody else that needs..." "I've got God on my side. God will provide. He will save me." And I think, and then the story, it's been such a long time since I heard it, there was a third element. I don't know what it was, but floodwaters kept on rising, and, well, the man couldn't swim, apparently, and he drowned, and he died. Tragic story. And he gets to heaven, he goes, "God, I don't understand. I had faith. I believed that you were going to save me." And God says, "I sent you a guy on a raft, and I sent you a guy in a helicopter. I mean, what do you want me to do here?" God works in ways that we may not be aware, or ways that we may not always imagine. What keeps us from seeing God's prescribed plan that may be right in front of our eyes or right in front of our nose? What keeps us from seeing God's will, God's working, His prescribed plan that may be right in front of us? Something that's very frustrating to me is whenever I am looking for something, I have something in my mind, I'm trying to find it, and I know I just saw it the other day, and I just cannot find it anywhere. And I tell myself, I know it's probably right underneath my nose. It's probably going to smack me right in the face. And sure enough, most of the times it is. A lot of times I'll be looking for a book off my shelf in my office that I remember that I had, and I wanted to read it for something, or look at its content for something that I was trying to study. And I'm looking all over the shelves, and I cannot find it because I have this certain idea, this certain image in my mind. I know what it's called, but I'm not so much looking for the title. I'm looking for I can recognize whenever I see it. And I cannot find it. Finally, my eyes do catch the title. I find it, and I realize, oh, there it is, right in front of me, right underneath my nose. But it looked completely different than what I remembered, right? And so your mind and your eyes have a way of playing tricks on you, and you can look right over something and not even see it. Why? Because you have some other image in your mind of what it looked like, and that was preventing you from actually seeing the obvious. It was preventing you from being able to see the object right in front of you because I had some other image that I prescribed to it, because that's what I thought it was, and I wasn't looking properly. Well, pride ultimately reveals itself as the refusal to accept any other vision or picture of life or of my circumstances other than the one that makes sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to me, or if I can't control it, then I won't accept it. Pride ultimately reveals itself as a refusal to accept any other vision or picture like I know that thing looked like this, and that's what I'm looking for. And a lot of times we approach life that way. I've got this certain way I want to think, or this certain way I want to be, or a certain way I feel about something, and by golly, that's my only vision. That's the only way I'm going to approach this, is whatever image that I have in my mind. That's what I'm going to look for. And it's not going to be any other way. If it doesn't make sense, or if I can't control it, then I will not accept it. Now, we parents, we get this all the time. And those of you who have raised kids, you know what it's like. Whenever there's pride in the home, there's pride in our children and our teenagers, and even in ourselves, that refusal to budge, that refusal to see, and that's honestly, that's a thing that's frustrating to my experience as a parent, and I say that, that same thing that all of us can relate to, that kids just don't seem to listen. They have their own idea in mind. And the way they want to do it, but you've already been there. You've already gone through this thing, and you know the reality of something, and you're trying to tell them, and they won't listen. And that's pride. And I could say that, not being condescending to my kids, because I was just like that. And many of you were probably just like that yourselves growing up. It is the thing with youthful ignorance, or youthful pride, or whatever you want to call it. That's a prime example of having a certain image in our mind and refusing to accept any other image, because that's what we have in mind. That's what we want to accept because it makes sense, or because we can control it. Proverbs 3 flies in the face of a self-reliant pride. It says in the Message translation, it says, trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume that you know it all. Pride. And when we think about the Christian life, we started this series called The Vow. And it commemorates the historical context of during the season of Lent, when the early church would often take people through discipleship and teaching them the Word of God, and teaching them what it means to be a Christian and how to live as a Christian in this world. Oftentimes during the season of Lent, that was the last few weeks of training and teaching before a person would submit to baptism, before they would be baptized. And in that training, in that teaching, they would learn certain vows. They would make a vow in how they would follow Christ, and they would learn what these were. Some of the literal vows that they would take, the first one would be, do you renounce Satan and all spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God? That's the first question that they're asked in their baptismal vows. And if you are here today and you've been baptized, perhaps there were vows that were similar that you recited, that you agreed to. These are statements that you say, yes, I agree. This is what I choose to do. This is what I aim to do. This is what I endeavor to do by the grace of God, to renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God. And last week we talked about the temptation of Christ in the wilderness, and certainly he went head to head with Satan. Satan threw everything he had at him as far as temptation goes, and Jesus, our Lord, demonstrated that will of renouncing Satan and all that he was tempting him to do. And that's what the Scripture, that's what God calls us to do, to renounce the work of Satan in the world. But the second vow in our baptismal vows is, do you renounce the evil powers of this world that corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? And I can't think of anything else in this world that does more damage in individual lives, in marriages, in homes, in churches, in communities than the evil power of pride. The evil power of pride. That arrogance, that self-reliance that defies, that has a certain image fixed in their mind, and they will not budge because it's all about them. The refusal to reach a compromise, the refusal to find common ground. That's definitely the problem with our politics in America today, is pride. It's dividing the country. Many homes are divided because there's prideful people in the homes who will not budge on certain ways. They will not seek to find common ground. There are marriages that are falling apart, that are being destroyed because of pride, because one will refuse to see the other person's point of view. And I don't care what you say, all divorces end as a result of pride. All divorces come about because of pride. You say it's not about, well, it's just not a coincidence that the marriage just doesn't work. No, it's pride. One or two of the people involved are filled with pride. That's the bottom line. What else would it be? Because it is, I believe any obstacle can be overcome whenever both parties are willing to work. When both parties are willing to work. But when there is at least one person in a relationship that is not willing to work, that is not willing to be humble, that is not willing to consider the other person's needs better than their own, it will not work. It will not work. Pride. It has the potential to destroy. Do you renounce? Do you renounce the evil powers of this world that corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? Do we renounce pride in our lives? If we're going to follow Christ, if we're going to live as He would have us to live, we must renounce pride in our life. We must identify those areas of our life where we are prideful. Those areas of our life that we will not budge because of stubbornness. Those areas of our lives where we are not willing to listen, to consider the other person's point of view. Pride. John said in his first epistle, he says, do not love the world or anything in the world. Now, the word for world there is cosmos, and it's where we get the word cosmos, meaning the world, the universe. But it's used in three different ways in the Scriptures. It is used to describe the physical world, and I don't think that's what is being referred to here. I don't think God is instructing us in His Word not to love our world in which we live, the creation in which He has created. It's a beautiful world. There's much good and beauty in this world. But the other way, it denotes people. For God so loved the world that He gave Him His only begotten Son. So the world being depicted as people. And certainly we're not called to not love people. And the third way it's used is in the sense of this world's system. The way the world, the general attitude that an attitude minus God, a philosophy minus God operates. This world system, the physical world, the natural world. The Bible talks about the natural man and the spiritual man. Well, the natural man, the world that is the natural world in which we live, spiritually speaking. It is this world system. It is an attitude that says, I will do things my way. It is an attitude, it is a way of thinking that says we do not need God. And we look around in our world today, in our secular progressive culture in which we live today, it is a world that is doing all it can to snuff God out of our culture, to snuff God out of our society altogether. That's the world system in which John, I believe, is talking about. Do not love the world or anything in the world, any attitude that reflects the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, and John describes it, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, those wrong desires of the flesh, a desire to just simply gratify myself. That's pride. That's selfishness. Lust of the eyes, coveting, looking at things and desiring to have those things that are not ours or things that we shouldn't be having or should not be desiring. And the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. The pride of life, a self-sufficient reliance upon the seen and the understood and the things of material possessions of this world. In other words, the pride of, look at what I've got. I have provided all this myself. I'm sustaining myself. All that I have, I got with my own hand and my own hard work. The pride of life. All these attitudes, all these characteristics come not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. That's the system of the world, the system of this world of the self-made man who doesn't need the help of others. The pride that says, I can do this myself and probably better. The spirit that thinks it knows better. This is that evil power of this world that dwells within us that we're called to denounce. We're called to identify and to denounce it. This was certainly the spirit that possessed Peter when Jesus was revealing what he was going to go through in just a matter of a few days. That he was going to go to Jerusalem and he was going to be betrayed by the chief priests and the elders, the teachers of the law, and that he was going to be killed, he was going to be crucified. What was Peter's response? It was a response, a rebuke. It says, so Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. For God forbid, Lord, this must not happen to you. You see, Peter had a certain image in his mind. He had a certain image of what the Messiah was going, who the Messiah was going to be, what the Messiah was going, what he was going to be like, what his role was going to be. He had a certain image fixed, and he wasn't open-minded and sensitive to the Holy Spirit to show him. Even though it was right in front of him, Jesus was right in front of him the whole time, teaching them, telling them what was going to happen to him, teaching him the way of the kingdom, that his kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom is about how we treat other people. His kingdom is about so much more than what they were thinking. But because he had an image in his mind, and it was one that he could understand, it was one he could relate to, because his image fashioned a king who would come with military might and pounce on the Roman authorities. That fit right in line with what he would love to do himself. Oftentimes, pride fashions our own little gods in our lives, and that's what we worship. Pride, if we think that, hey, you know, if I just work hard and I can do this, I can earn all this myself. It's all up to me. I can do it. I can make a name for myself. What do we begin to do before long? We begin to worship money. We begin to worship material things because of the image that we have in our mind of what success is. Pride that all stems from a pride, a selfish ambition in our hearts. God forbid, Lord, this must not happen to you. But he turned, that is Jesus, he turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me because you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's. You're setting your mind on man's philosophies, the systems of this world, and how the world operates. You're elevating your wisdom and your understanding above that of God's. Pride is always attempting to put itself higher. It is always trying to justify its ways. How we do that sometimes. Sometimes we just refuse to take responsibility for our actions. We've always got a reason. It's never my fault. It's always somebody else's fault. Right? It's always somebody else's fault. I could tell you some stories. I'd love to just tell you some stories, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to do that. I'd embarrass my kids too much. But pride. In fact, pride was the downfall of that plagued God's people throughout time, throughout their history as a people. When Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, and he's going where he would lay down his life for us. He was going and he was performing miracles, and he was doing the work that God was calling him to do. There were some Pharisees, some well-meaning Pharisees, who approached him and says, "You got to get out of here," because he's in the area where King Herod had jurisdiction, and King Herod, as you know, is the one who had John the Baptist beheaded, and you ruffle Herod's feathers, it's pretty dangerous to do that. And Jesus had been going; his fame had been spreading, news of a king and everything else had been building, and Herod was nervous. He was one who reacted a lot, and he was a walking time bomb. And some Pharisees and teachers of the law, they got word that Herod was looking for Jesus, and that Herod potentially was out to get Jesus and to even kill him. And so, Jesus, you need to get out of here. You need to stop what you're doing, and you need to get out of here. Well, Jesus, he was not deterred from doing what he felt God wanting him to do. And he says, "You go tell that old fox." And that was not a very complimentary statement back then. You think of a fox as a sly, crafty, but it was really an insult compared to the most honored of animals to the Jewish mindset was the lion, and to compare this king not as a lion but as a fox, it was an insult. And he says, "You go tell that old fox what I'm doing, that today I'm casting out demons and I'm performing miracles, and tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing, and the third day I will finish my work." In other words, God has a plan for my life, and I am going to be faithful to complete that plan. And I'm not going to be deterred by some earthly king. And so they're telling him this, and he doesn't pay any attention to it because of how close of attention he paid to his father's moving in his life, his father's leading, that he was not going to die outside of Jerusalem. He's going to die in Jerusalem. And as Jesus was thinking about that, his emotions began to well up, and his heart began to break, and he began to cry, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you." See, Jerusalem had a long-standing history of not being very kind to the prophets of God, God's people. Oftentimes, when we go back into the Old Testament and we look at all the dealings that God had with his people, and the bouts of pride, and how often God would have to set things straight with his people, and he'd have to lead them down a path, down a road that would lead to their suffering, that would lead to their discipline. Oftentimes it would lead to their exile from a neighboring nation. One of their enemies would overpower them because they refused to listen to the Lord. They refused to follow his ways. And oftentimes God would send them prophets to warn them. Look, if these prophets would come and they would tell them, "Look, if you don't turn from your wicked ways, this is going to come upon you." And they would kill the prophets. They would excommunicate the prophets. Whatever they did, they abused them. One example where Nehemiah, back in Nehemiah chapter 9, they had just got done building the wall, and they're going to be dedicating the wall. And Nehemiah is taking the lead and praying for the people and with the people. And in his prayer, he's recounting their history in a spirit of repentance in submission to God. He says, "But they were hard-hearted." He's speaking of the people of Israel down through history. "They are hard-hearted and went against your authority, turning their backs on your law and putting to death your prophets who came to witness against them with the purpose of turning them back again to you. And they did much to make you angry." And he goes on and says, you warned them in order to turn them back to your law. You see, constantly, God's whole purpose of the discipline, his whole purpose of breaking this people was to bring them back because of his great mercy. But they became arrogant, filled with pride, and disobedient to your commandments. They sinned against your ordinances, of which you said the person who obeys them will live by them. Stubbornly, pridefully, they turned their backs on you, became stiff-necked, and refused to listen. See, that whole spirit of the world is crept into the life of God's people. It's that spirit of stiff-neckedness and refusal to listen. For many years, you were patient with them by your spirit. You warned them through your prophets, yet they paid no attention, so you gave them into the hands of the neighboring peoples. But in your great mercy, you did not put an end to them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and merciful God. Oh, Jerusalem, 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 how you have killed the prophets. And you've stoned them, the ones that I've sent to you. How often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And you were not willing. This is in Luke 13, by the way. If you have a moment, you could turn there, because I want you to underline that statement. In Luke 13, verse 34, Jesus said, how often you people, you've been filled with pride, you've had a certain image in your mind, and you refused to listen. You pursued that image because you leaned on your own understanding more than mine. And I warned you that if you follow that image, if you follow that path, it's going to lead to destruction. You refused to listen, and you were not willing. Underline that. That is the pride that hinders us from being able to follow and to discover God's plan for our lives. We were not willing to listen. We were not willing to look. We're not willing to open our eyes. In verse 35, look, your house is left to you desolate. It's left in ruin. It's left in chaos. It's left in emptiness. That's the result of pride. Do you renounce the evil powers of this world that corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? Pride destroys individual lives. Pride destroys families. It destroys churches. It destroys communities, even whole nations. In Matthew's gospel account, in Matthew 23, we have the same account where we find Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. In this account, Matthew, in his version of it, it proceeds with Jesus giving a sharp rebuke. Just prior to when he begins to weep, just prior to that, we find the story of Jesus, and he's rebuking, giving a sharp rebuke to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. But interestingly, just prior to speaking out against the Pharisees, Jesus makes the statement in this teaching, in this principle, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The cross of Christ was the result of man's pride and defiance, screaming out to God, leave us alone. We don't need your guidance. We don't need you to rule over us. The cross is a result of man's pride and defiance. And that same defiant pride eventually led to Jerusalem's fall. A number of years later in 70 A.D., they refused to accept Christ as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, as their Redeemer and their Messiah, the chosen one, because of an image they had in their mind that did not fit what made sense to them. And they refused to listen. Even though Jesus, through miracles and through his words, proved himself over and over and over again, showed how he was the fulfillment of Scripture, of what the prophets foretold and had taught. They refused to listen because they wanted to be in control. In 70 A.D., they were humbled. Israel exalted themselves. They exalted themselves. God did not exalt them. They exalted themselves, and they were humbled. Do you renounce the evil powers of this world that corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? Because a life led by pride is a life that experiences more desolation and emptiness than it does abundance and happiness. So what is a sign of pride? What is a sign of pride? I believe it's predominantly fear. I believe it's predominantly fear. Why? Because when we are full of pride, what are we doing? We are assuming full control of our lives. I'll do it myself. I'll do it my way. I will be in control. I will set the tone. I will set the pace of my own life. I will be the ruler and the king of my own life. I will make the decisions. I am assuming full control of my life. But when life becomes too much for us to handle, and it will, because that's life, it is bigger than us. When life finally comes to a point where we're overwhelmed by our circumstances, that it is too big for us to handle, then we're overcome by fear because of losing control. Fear of losing control, fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, fear of failure, whatever else that can work in our heart and our mind, the things that we fear because life got too big. And somewhere along the line, whether we admit it or not, or whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we are leaning on our own understanding of things and not trusting wholeheartedly in God in our lives. You see, we could trust wholeheartedly in God, and we're still going to experience all the trials, and we're going to experience all the hardships. Life is still going to appear very big to us, but we do not have to fear. We do not have to be overcome with anxiety. We do not need to be defeated. Oh, yes, we will experience fear. We will experience anxiety in our lives. We will experience all these things, but we do not have to dwell there. We do not have to be defeated by it. The psalmist said, as we read earlier in Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. And because of that, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" So there's some big things that come up in our life at times, isn't there? Things, if we're standing alone, things that are so much bigger than us, and if we don't have anybody that we know that has our back, who are we to stand up against such obstacles? The psalmist said, "When the wicked advance against me to devour me," that's a big thing. Well, because the Lord is the light of my life and my salvation, the Lord is the stronghold of my life, it is my enemies, my foes who will stumble. And though an army besiege me, that's a big thing. That seems like impossible odds and impossible obstacles to stand up against. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. Not a prideful confidence in oneself, in one's own abilities, but confidence in the abilities of God. Confidence that God, who we know is the stronghold of our life, who we know has our back, He is on our side. And if He's on our side, then whom shall we fear? It is the person who's filled with pride that says, you know what, I don't need God. I don't need to listen to this advice or to that person's counsel. I don't need to do anything. I've got this. I'll figure this out on my own. Good luck with that. That person who has that attitude is setting themselves up for a mighty fall, and it's pretty lonely. One thing, the psalmist said, one thing I ask from the Lord, only one thing, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, that I may simply dwell in His presence, that I may gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple. That's all I want. So when we teach that we as Christians, if we're going to commit to following the Lord, that we renounce pride in our life. We're saying, choose only one thing. It is not choose your way and the highway. It is choose one thing, and that is to know Christ. That one thing is to seek His presence in every aspect of your life. Seek to please Him in every area of your life. You see, when we have pride wants to go our own way. Humility seeks to embrace God's way, seeks to find out what pleases the Lord. It recognizes that we are fallible. It recognizes that we cannot often see the big picture. It recognizes oftentimes, and I use this as an illustration the other day, oftentimes we're traveling on a road in the fog. And oftentimes we have the brights on, trying to cut through the fog to see down the road on our own. But how many of you have driven in fog, thick fog, and the vision gets worse the brighter we try to shine the lights? But He says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my pathway. When we put the lights on dim, then we see most clearly to travel in fog. But pride, stubborn pride, I'm going to cut through this fog one way or another. Take that. We shine the brightest lights, but it just gets foggier and worse to see. One thing I ask, this is the only thing I seek, that I may have your presence in my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple. For in the day of trouble, He will keep me safe. He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His sacred tent, like Jesus' metaphor with the hen. The mother hen gathers her chicks and hides them and shelters them under her wing. The same imagery there. When we choose a way other than pride, when we choose to submit ourselves to lean not on our own understanding, but to trust in the Lord with all of our heart and to acknowledge Him in all of our ways and not lean on our own understanding, it's there that we find ourselves in a position that when trouble comes, we'll find shelter and we will find a safe keeping, a safe dwelling in His presence. And He will set me upon a rock. He will elevate me. Those who try to elevate themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves, God will exalt. God will raise up. And He will set me up high on a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At His sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music in my heart. Thus, we can travel through this journey, we can travel through this life, experience hardships, but when we take a path of humility, when we choose to renounce the things of this world system, the evil powers that destroy the creatures of God, destroy our lives, namely pride, when we choose to renounce those things, we find a joy and a peace in the midst of all of that, to realize that it's not all up to us, that we can rest in His goodness. I want us just to, I've got a song I want to play, and I know none of you probably know it, and it's not really meant for us to sing along, but I'm going to have the words up on the screen, and I want you to listen to the words. And maybe if you're here today and you have something on your heart, you need to pray, and you like to pray this morning, the altars are always open. The title of the song is "Come As You Are." Come as you are. If you recognize you've got pride in your life, come as you are. The good news is, the cross was the effect. The cross was the outcome of man's pride, but the resurrection was the outcome of God's triumph and power and victory. Christ overcomes our pride when we come to the cross and we're crucified in Him. He fills us with His new life, and He gives us new direction for our lives. But if maybe through this song, through something that God is speaking to you about, you'd like to come and pray, I'd invite you to do so. Let's go ahead and play "Come As You Are."